Yeah, I feel like we should just wrap up Series 3 now.
We're done.
So...
We've peaked. Hello, you are listening to Off Radar, It's a Movie podcast. I'm James Smith, a professional film and video editor.
I'm James Eatock, a freelance writer and illustrator specialising in 1980s cartoons.
And I'm Neil Brock, aka Nige, the man with two names, former film journalist and currently working in the games industry.
Each week, one of us picks a movie that all three of us either haven't seen in many years or in some cases haven't seen at all.
We each watch the chosen movie, return to the microphone and let you all know exactly what we thought of it.
He desperately needs her to survive.
It sort of handled some incredibly delicate topics incredibly well.
I will never watch this again. What was that?
If you fancy joining in and suggesting a movie for us to watch, why not tweet us at OffRadarPodcast
or email us on offradarpod@gmail.com.
If you like what you hear, please subscribe, share, and by all means, leave a review.
For now, strap in, turn the volume up, and let's go Off Radar.
I'm James Smith.
Let me just go and change my shirt.
All right. Hey guys, and welcome back to Off Radar Series 3. I'm James Smith. I am joined by Neil Brock.
Oh yeah! Hello.
Neil Brock. I should introduce you like that. Who his wrestling name is Nige. And James.
Not the most.
Nige. His wrestling name is Nige.
Oh, hello, it's Nige.
And James Eatock.
James 316 said, "I just whipped your ass."
What's your wrestling name? Buster Toons, probably.
Yeah, I could do that. Stone Cold James Eatock, Randy Eatock.
Randy Eatock. That's your normal name.
James Hogan.
James Hogan, the ultimate Eatock.
The ultimate Eatock.
So
Jake the Eatock Roberts.
We could carry on forever.
We could do that.
So the film today, if you hadn't guessed, is called You Cannot Kill David Arquette, which came out in 2020. It's a documentary. It's written by Price James, or maybe that's James Price and I've put the name around the wrong way.
Either way it works.
It does.
Price is a good first
Let me just check. It's Price James. I thought I put the name around the wrong way. And David Darg. And obviously the sole purpose of this film is about David Arquette, who you will probably most know from Scream. And Nige, you picked this film for us to watch. I'd never seen it. And to be honest, before we get into this, I didn't even know David Arquette was a wrestler.
Wow.
Well,
I never. Well, I'll jump in here, I think, and kind of give a bit of background to why I picked this film. Because obviously it's the first documentary we've picked, and it's quite a strange subject, I would say. It's not your sort of classic, going to clean up on awards. This is a film about kind of pop culture in a lot of ways. So let's get back into the time machine and go way back to the year 2000. And I was a youngish 17-year-old guy who used to spend my Friday nights around my mate's house watching TNT on Sky, watching WCW Nitro and other such wonderful things. Like, for those of you who aren't clued up on wrestling, you had WWF, which is now known as WWE, which was like the big hitter in the wrestling industry. And then you had kind of WCW, which was like almost the slightly second rate. And for a while, there was a bit of a back and forth about who was the best, different wrestlers moving across to each ones. Anyway, back in 2000, it was unfashionable to like WCW. So in the States, what they did was something absolutely batshit crazy to promote a film that was coming out, which starred a lot of people from WCW. It was called Ready to Rumble, had people such as Bill Goldberg, Diamond Dallas Page, and Macho Man Randy Savage in. To promote this comedy film starring David Arquette, there was a crossover between wrestling and the movie industry. So much so that David Arquette started appearing on WCW shows. Everyone thought, well, this is a bit silly, bit of a joke. Well, it didn't get any funnier when David Arquette won the WCW Championship belt, so the top dog belt. We had an actor, not a wrestler, who won the title. That basically turned not only WCW, but also David Arquette, who at the time, as you mentioned, was known for Scream, had done a few really good indie films, was really starting to build a good career for himself. It made him a bit of a joke, I'm sorry to say. And since then, his career, aside from appearing in Scream sequels, has really gone nowhere. So let's fast forward, get in a time machine, back to 2020. What the hell's happened to David Arquette? Who, Dewey from Scream? that's pretty much all people know him for. Unless you're in America and you watched wrestling, you also know him as the guy that basically killed WCW. So what we have in this documentary is the story of what's happened. What happened back in the day, what's happened since, his life, his struggles, his sort of breakdown of his marriage to the also very famous Courtney Cox, and everything in between. So yeah, it's a really, for me especially, because I kind of followed it from the very start and watched Ready to Rumble, which I must admit is quite a good film. It's got Oliver Platt in. I will rule you as like a bizarre wrestling king. But yeah, it's just really interesting from my perspective to kind of, having almost lived through it to a bit, to come back to that story so many years later and kind of see the real side, the real story behind everything that happened to poor old David Arquette.
David Arquette as the wrestler sucks.
I don't give a shit about David Arquette.
It's the biggest disgrace in professional wrestling history.
David Arquette just... What's going on here?
An untrained Hollywood actor wins most prestigious championship.
His involvement in wrestling really hurt his career.
So like Nige, I kind of, on Friday nights, would watch WCW. I was a bigger fan of WWF at the time. But I did still watch WCW on TNT. So I remember distinctly when David Arquette won the world title. And yeah, it was a really dark time for wrestling. And in the 20-something years since, it still is one of the, considered the lowest points in wrestling. There have been others like the death of Owen Hart and stuff like that. But David Arquette is unfairly often up there. And it wasn't his decision to win it. He didn't want to win it as well. I can't remember if it's in the documentary, but he said in interviews in the past, he's like, I didn't want to win that. Diamond Dallas Page was a good friend of his, and said, yeah, he didn't want to win it, but the bookers at the time that book all the predetermined matches and decisions said, no, we're going to put the belt on him, and all it did was devalue the belt. As Nige said, made him a laughing stock.
I started drinking more, just sort of like I was unhappy. I wasn't being true to myself.
Yeah.
We jump into his life, and this is a man that is very unwell. He's an alcoholic, he's depressed, and on top of that, he's had a heart attack. There's a bizarre moment where he's given like ketamine in a doctor's kind of surgery, which is a horse tranquilizer, which I didn't even realise that, they gave people, and he's very unwell, and that right from the right from the start, he's kind of slurring, and he's going in and out of these kind of alcoholic kind of moments, but decides to give wrestling another shot, almost as a chance to prove to himself, prove to the wrestling world, but almost as a healing process to try and get himself better, and which at moments he does do in this film.
I want to clear my name and, through the process, honor wrestling.
This ain't the movies. We don't have stunt doubles.
I'd like to announce my return to professional wrestling.
Did I wrestle again? What are your thoughts?
The thing about this documentary, and maybe this is jumping ahead a bit too far, is there's something in wrestling. There are two terms. One is shoot and one is work. A shoot, it means things are real. What you're seeing is real. So in a wrestling ring, someone throwing someone to the mat and them hitting the floor, that is a shoot move. A work is when someone does a crazy move but protects the other wrestler. Or in terms of an interview, a shoot interview is when I'd sit here and I'd be like, a worked interview, but I'll be like, I'm going to see James Smith in the steel cage, and we're going to go toe to toe, and that dirty old Nige is going to be my tag partner, etc., etc. A shoot interview is like, oh, I hated working with him and he sucked. Or if it's taking place in a wrestling thing, a shoot would be where things turn real, and you do see that in this documentary with when Arquette wrestles this wrestler called Nick Gage, who's actually an ex-criminal and a pretty nasty piece of work, but gets booked by independent wrestling organizations. But in this, I found myself quite a lot of the time thinking, and maybe it's a genius move on the documentary, but it's like, what of this is real and what is fake? So what is work and what is a shoot? the confrontation early on in the film is he goes into a bar and he goes to talk to Brian Knobbs of the Nasty Boys, who's like an ex-WWF, WCW wrestler, this big, fat, burly guy. And they get into this confrontation. I found myself watching going, I don't believe this is real. This feels like a work. It didn't feel genuine enough. And I know, don't get me wrong, I'm not ignorant. Lots of documentaries stage a lot of things. We've seen them over the years. You get, the truest documentaries is like a David Attenborough documentary about sea life, and you're not going to get a squid going, I'm going to see you in the Madison Square Garden or anything like that. It's very real. But a lot of documentaries cut and edit and stage certain things. We've seen that over the years, but this one I think does it more so than any other documentary.
This fucking asshole. Okay. That's my partner.
Interesting what you're saying about the kind of, the real and the fake there.
Yeah.
Because that contrast with like the kind of the showmanship and you're very right. Like even some of the scenes, like with the doctor and stuff, you almost feel, is that real? There's a bit where he says,
I'm just kind of sick of being a joke, to be honest with you.
And then he's
sat on a horse wearing a wizard costume.
Oh, the horse dressed as a wizard, and I'm like, okay.
Vaping.
Did you obviously know what's going on here? But then you contrast that with like basically as the film continues, he gets deeper into becoming a professional wrestler, but it's not like what you guys were talking about. It's not like Ultimate Warrior and Legion of Doom kind of wrestling. It's like someone's backyard getting beaten up in a death match with glass. And that, to me, I don't know if I'm right here, but that looked pretty real.
Oh, that is real.
But the ones where he meets those random people and they're like basically, oh, it's David Arquette, you're a joke kind of thing. And he's like, well, no, I'll come and wrestle you now. And they just beat the shit out of him. Like, it's not a wrestling match.
It's horrific, isn't it?
And and you just think, what the hell is he getting himself back into? What is the point that he's trying to prove?
But I think going into that, he knows what he's about to do because he knows wrestling. Like, he's a huge wrestling fan, or as they call it in the industry, Mark. He loves wrestling, so he knows going into that he's going to get busted open with light tubes and stuff. And so that is all very real. But I think he's not unprepared for that situation. They probably, before filming, he said, like, give me all you got because we need this. I need to be covered in cuts and blood and bruises because as it forms the narrative of him really going into backyard wrestling is considered, the worst thing you can do.
I love it when the ring collapses just on that. And they're like trying to get it set up, and they're like the whole ring is just like it could be anything. It's literally someone's backyard. It's just a joke. And
I would say that the realest moment in this documentary for me is the match he has with Nick Gage, where Nick Gage gets the busted open light tube and starts cutting him, and you see David Arquette react like suddenly it's not a worked wrestling thing. He grabs like Nick Gage and like pushes him away and like pins him down, like, holds him there by the throat, and he's like got a gusher coming out of his neck. That's real.
That's real. And he could have quite easily died.
He could have died because Nick Gage. If you look up Nick Gage online, he's like an ex-criminal who somehow got into the wrestling world. And all Nick Gage's matches are, I'm going to cut your head open with a pizza cutter. I'm going to cut you. I'm going to do this. And don't get me wrong, that wrestling has existed for a good 20-something years now, maybe even longer if you go back to the days of Abdullah the Butcher. But it is, it's really nasty. But if you look, that moment is the realest in the documentary because they, generally go to the hospital, and you've got, which was really kind of shocked me watching it, was the dearly departed Luke Perry in the back, in the car.
One of his close friends.
I was like, oh my God, it's Luke Perry.
Because they started together in Buffy the Vampire Slayer, like way back in the day. Like, not the TV show, the film that came before it. Yeah. With Donald Sutherland, I think, is in that as well. And Christy Swanson. And I really enjoyed it. But anyway, it's kind of crazy. Yeah, like this sort of cross between this kind of not trying to be a joke, trying to prove himself, and like this underdog story that he's trying to get across when there's all these ridiculous things going on. He puts himself in like dangerous situations. One of the like most sort of heartwarming bits is when he goes down to Mexico. Like, Mexico's really well known for like luchador wrestling, like people in masks doing all these crazy flips and hurricanes and all sorts of different moves like that. And he kind of has to go and prove himself to them. And again, there might be a little bit of staging of like, oh, you've got to be able to do the basics, otherwise we're not even going to touch you. But there's a really nice bit where they're like wrestling in front of cars, parts of cars in traffic jams and waiting at lights, and he's just fighting someone on the concrete. And you can tell he's actually getting it. He's starting to slowly improve. And it is kind of like that Rocky story of someone like coming back, trying to rise up. You don't know whether or not it's, as Etok sort of touched upon, this kind of stage situation where he's an actor and like everyone's giving him this chance because it's like, oh, it's David Arquette, let's just look and point at him and stare, and it's just a bit strange. Or whether or not he is actually genuinely winning people over because he's so passionate about wrestling. He loves it and he wants to do it, but he's never going to get over the fact that he's David Arquette. Like it's always going to come back to, you're David Arquette, you won the WCW title in 2000, you're a joke. And he just wants to be taken seriously. And I think because it's damaged so badly, his careers, his mental health,
definitely
the breakdown of his marriage, it's almost like, we were talking about Courtney Cox. We mentioned this a few times in the podcast. Like we talked about Jon Favreau in a recent podcast, and like his Ultimate Fighter scene in Friends. It's almost a bit like that, where his current, I can't remember if she's his girlfriend or his wife, but she's like thinking, oh yeah, I'll support him. But you can tell she's like, this is crazy. What the hell is he doing? He's got a family. He's got kids. We live in this huge mansion. Life is good, even if he's not as famous as he once was. Life is good, and he's jeopardizing it all just so he can prove himself to this crowd that think he's, as I said, we keep saying it, thinks he's a joke. He goes to one of those like WrestleCon type situations where he's there to like sign autographs, and nobody really wants to know.
I think that scene is staged though. I don't care what anybody says. Like, one, it's David Arquette. I would, if I saw him at a like bloody table, I'd run up to him and be like, oh God, can I have your signature on something? I've been the biggest fan of his like films and stuff, but it's still David Arquette. But also, wrestling fans would want his signature because of the infamy that comes with it. Be like, oh, I had David Arquette sign my WCW DVD or something. So that is one of those scenes where it's like, it's staged and it works brilliantly. But I think because you know who David Arquette is, nobody's not going to be going up to his table. I guarantee they filmed that like that. They said, keep everybody back. And it's like, now go and sign stuff. I'm sure if you looked it up online, you'd find that, that scene was completely staged. Because it's David Arquette. It's, people are going to go up to his table.
Why do you want to get back in the ring?
It's been 18 years of people thinking I disrespected wrestling.
I'm just kind of sick of being a joke. There's a lot going on with David.
His anxiety is crippling. 2 years ago, it's a heart attack. A year later, it's a death match. So what does that mean for next year?
The ribs actually break, they can actually bleed into your lungs.
Wrestling's not fake, guys.
The interesting thing with this film is we see the vulnerability of him throughout.
Yeah.
And, like we see moments where he's drinking so much that he's throwing up. And, before he's about to, like wrestle or go on to a show, a talk show or something like that. And, we see these kind of really kind of severe moments of depression and mental health issues contrasted with humour and ridiculousness. And it's an interesting film because at times it doesn't go deep enough, I don't think, into what's wrong with him. We look at it and then the next scene is there's a bloke in his pants driving down the road. It's just like,
if you're part of the joke, it's not as painful as if you are the joke.
The wrestler, that film, or Rocky, it's what he wanted it to be, is his Rocky movie. It's his comeback, like he's been nowhere for the last 15 years. I know he's got a Scream movie that's just come out, but other than that, like when we all watched this film a few months ago, I had no idea that even existed. I had no idea David Arquette existed. But and for me, it was a sad film in many ways. I felt sorry for him for most of the film, and I know that is in the intention. I wanted them to go further. There's a bit where he talks about his childhood, but it stops really short. It kind of says about his mum, but it doesn't really go any further with that. And he's clearly had some issues when he was growing up, which we don't really know about.
It's interesting that they actually get Patricia Arquette, another famous actress whose career has kind of disappeared a bit as well, and she's on there as like a talking head. They actually do interviews with her, and I was quite surprised to see her in it. Like, and she was very supportive of him generally, I would say. But likewise, like she obviously, I think they grew up from like quite a hippie family. That kind of, it was a bit of a strange upbringing, but we talked about Courtney Cox as well, and the fact that she's in the film,
that blew my mind.
yeah, I was extremely surprised. Like, I know that they had a breakdown in marriage, and it seems like they're on fairly good terms. But the fact she was like, "Oh yeah, what's good for my career? I'll be in a documentary about David Arquette being a wrestler," surprised the hell out of me. We mentioned Luke Perry. There's also, like, in a strange kind of twist of fate, his son, Jack Perry, Luke Perry's son, Jack Perry, is a professional wrestler called like Jungle Boy, and it's like, what is this world that we didn't realise? All these kind of, I don't want to call them has-beens because they're not at all really, but people have kind of drift off the radar. They've all suddenly got into bloody wrestling.
I did love the fact that scene where Luke Perry's son wrestles David Arquette. I think it's like an epilogue kind of thing, and they have that really beautiful moment. And that's like genuine. Like the wrestling in the ring obviously is all predetermined, and it's all like almost like a dance in a way. And then he just, they have that little kind of very emotional, very public emotional display of emotion at the very end. And it's, really, really sweet moment. Because obviously, at that point, Luke Perry had passed away during the filming of the documentary, which is really amazing when you think about it. It's like they were filming this documentary. It's almost like Luke Perry's last contribution to film is rushing his friend to hospital who's been in a wrestling match. You know what I mean? That's nuts when you think about it. But I tell you what, one of my favourite scenes in this film, or like one of my favourite shots, and as a filmmaker you may appreciate this, James Smith, and Nige yourself, is the beginning of the montage where he's on the beach and he just starts jogging and then he runs. And he does, running on sand's a bugger anyway, but he does this run. The camera stays with him for about like a good 15, 20 seconds, but it's got this music as well. And the camera slowly closes in as he's running. It's such a great intro to like a montage. I was like, that's almost like challenging for Rocky-esque status as a montage. But I think the thing about this documentary is, there are moments like you talk about his mental health. I think there are moments where that is definitely real and brought to the forefront. I mean, the very fact this documentary exists, I think, is a look into his mental health as well. It's like, I'm going to make a film or, I'm going to produce a film about me trying to get back into wrestling. Some of it's going to be staged. Some of it's going to be, shits and giggles. Some of it's going to be serious. But I think by making this, it's like it's an insight into his mental health. And I think there are moments of this, like you say, the drinking, and just there are you see, like you said, it is a sad movie at times. I think there is hopeful moments, especially towards the end, like where he finally does wrestle. And as someone who's watched a lot of wrestling in their life, it's like, he's actually very good. And obviously, a wrestler is only as good as the person in the ring with him sometimes.
Yeah, and he gains the respect. Again, I don't know if this is staged, but, he seems to get the respect of the people that he's kind of met along the journey, and that seems authentic. And you root for him in this film. You really do. You really want him to get better, and you really want him to do well.
Turn around and you poke me in the eye. Correct. You can't see. You scrape my back. So turn around, you start beating the shit out of me. And I stumble toward the middle of the ring, and you double axe handle me.
I think it's a valuable piece, and I think it's worth making. But the biggest problem I had with this documentary is it's really hard to play the underdog when it's clear you're rich as fuck.
Yeah, everything is stacked in your favour.
You can't like, he probably produced this, so he shoved, hundreds of thousands, maybe not more, into this. It's really hard to kind of, empathise.
Well, yeah, there's that counterpoint, isn't there, that he's kind of stealing a living from other wrestlers. Like, there's a lot of animosity in the sense of he was the champion, where you've got people who worked for 20 years in the industry to finally get that chance to be the champion. It's like, oh, we're just going to give it to this actor guy to promote the film, whatever. And it's like, even when he finally sort of pays his dues and gets to a certain point, it's still like almost a hobby, because for some people it's their living. It's the only way they're making money. And he is a really likeable guy, and he does come across as likeable. He's like that hyperactive kid at school that you almost don't know what to do with him, because he's just always on. And I think that's the part of his personality, and that almost like the mental health stuff that we've touched upon a few times comes across very sort of keenly with those bits. But yeah, he talks bang on in the sense of like, how much sympathy can you have for someone who's kind of had success, kind of it blew up a bit in his face, but he's still got a great life, like realistically. And yeah, he may not be taken as seriously as he was. Like, if you watch after 2000, if you go and look at the films he was in, it does sort of, there's a few films in there where like Never Been Kissed and Ravenous, and obviously the Scream movies where you're like, oh, okay, those were decent films, and like he was doing quite well, even like going back being in Airheads. And then after 2000, it's like, I don't think I've seen any of these films.
When did Seven-Legged Freaks come out? Because I remember enjoying that.
It was Eight-Legged Freaks who've stolen a leg, but that was 2002. So I say that was right at the end. And he did that 3,000 Miles to Graceland with Courtney Cox. I think Kurt Russell was in it. It was about Elvis. It was a very bizarre film. Was it Kurt Russell? It might have even been John Travolta. But regardless, it was a very strange film. Oh, it's Kurt Russell and Kevin Costner playing like Elvis impersonators. It was very strange.
Wow.
But yeah, it's just his career. We've said it a bunch of times. It kind of went out of there. But one thing I would say is like a companion piece, if you do go and watch this film, watch Ready to Rumble, because it's really charming, funny, very naughty / late 90s film that there's a guy called there's like a crossover with Ed Wood. I don't know if any of you've seen the Johnny Depp film Ed Wood. There's a guy in it like Bela Lugosi style who's like, Sal Baldini, wanna wrestle? And he's so good in Ready to Rumble, and it's just really charming. And I really wish Ready to Rumble didn't have this career-defining, destroying, WCW-destroying thing attached to it forevermore, because otherwise it could have been a half-decent film that stood up in its own right. But yeah, I do honestly think to get the most out of both, watch the documentary and this film, and it'll all make a bit more sense.
So, what did we think, and what are our ratings then? Yeah, like Nige. I mean, you picked this. What did you reckon?
Well, yeah, I think for me, one of the most interesting things is obviously you got me in ETOC, and we've obviously going to have our background information. I'm most keen to kind of know what you thought as someone who came into it kind of with like fresh eyes, I suppose, and not really understanding the backstory. For me, I'd almost want to give it 2 ratings, one for like a wrestling fan and one for a non-wrestling fan. So I'm probably going to end up somewhere roughly in the middle. I mean, I enjoyed it a lot more than I expected to. I expected to be bored after like 10 minutes and be like, why the hell did I even put this on? The only reason I did suggest it was because I enjoyed it a lot more than I expected to. So for me, it almost surprises me to say I'm going to give it a 7, which is probably maybe higher than a lot of people will go away and watch this and think for themselves. But I totally agree with what Etok was saying about the stage factor and stuff like that. But it's the sort of film you can put on and you can actually just enjoy the journey as much as anything else, because it is a journey film, definitely.
Etok, what?
Yeah, I like Nige. I love the idea of what you said there. I get the thing of you've got that. I want to give it a wrestling score and a score from outside of the wrestling bubble as well. But I think I'm pretty close to Nige. I was going to go for. I was going to go for a 6. It's very entertaining. I'm not sure I'd watch it again, but I appreciate that it is one of those you could happily put on, and I would happily show it to people. But yeah, watch this, enjoy it. And I think it does tell a fun enough story, but it's I don't think it's something I would personally rewatch. But I did like it. I did like it, but it's a 6 for me.
Yeah, I think. Overall, I really didn't know what to expect. Like, I mean, I liked wrestling as a kid, so like some of those wrestlers you talked about, I remember, and I had the WWF annual or whatever it was, and used to dress up and wrestle with my sister.
Wow, this is a new side that I just didn't know.
Yeah, since then, like I haven't really followed wrestling, but for me, like I actually kind of disagree in that point of view. I think someone who doesn't know about wrestling will get more out of this than because you're seeing you see the history, you see the David Arquette's kind of journey through that. But then, most of this film for me, it wasn't necessarily about that. It was more about him. As a whole, I thought this documentary was well made. I thought it was fun. I thought it was sad. I felt it was not the best documentary I've ever seen. I felt it was missing something. I felt at times it was quite indulgent, like you've kind of pointed out. I do think that because he was quite ill, I did feel sorry for him though. So the fact that I did root for him kind of meant that, although what you said about why should I kind of care about him in that respect, I felt like because he was so ill, I did. I felt that was genuine enough. I think it surprised me. I wanted to know the next part of his journey. But as a documentary as a whole, I think I've seen much better documentaries, generally thinking. So I think it's 6.5. Would I watch it again? Maybe in a few years' time. Liked, didn't love.
You are godlike. You are the man.
Dad, what?
One last time, I have to really prove myself.